delighted to see everybody here today braving the winter chill. Shows how passionate all of us are about food, and especially local food. My name is Susan Jennings. I'm co-chair of the Regional Council on Sustainability, and I'm really delighted to welcome you here. This is the fourth in a series of seminars we've held this year, and they've really been the most successful series that the council has hosted. We had, starting in November, we had sessions on energy efficiency for municipalities, solar siting, and wind siting, and we've had lots of help putting those all together. And I want to give a shout out to the Green Communities Division and the Department of Energy Resources, who really gave us a lot of support in putting all these together. Introduce Paul Veachin, who's going to give us the formal welcome from the university. You know that he has been working on economic development issues in the region for many years, including food. So thank you very much for being with us.
That's a very generous introduction. My father was one of 18 French kids who grew up on a farm in Dartmouth. And at a very early age, I learned about hoeing and planting tomato sticks and tending our garden, our family garden. So this notion of farm to table, this sort of nouveau thing, which is good because it gets people who, like me, might have started in a concrete world where you've got a disconnect. Tomatoes come from Stop and Shop, not from a farm. The whole idea of sustainability and local sourcing just makes fundamental sense. So hooray for you folks in the sustainability world and in the CMAP world and in the municipal planning and engagement world for keeping our collective world eye on that ball. It is important, and it's a thing that we all have an obligation for. And there has been no fiercer advocate, more committed advocate to that cause than the guy I'm here to introduce. Commissioner Greg Watson. He has served several governors. He has served in the energy and sustainability, like St. John and the Baptist in the desert. This is a guy who 10 years ago had been trying to get people to focus on the sustainability power of renewable energy. So he's a great friend to the region. He's no stranger to this area. And like I say, there's no stronger advocate for this cause that I can think of than Greg Watson. So Mr. Commissioner, please come in.
But it is great to be here this morning. By the way, just the cover slide here, which has both the CMAP logo and the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources, and the report is sort of indicative of the collaborations and partnerships, which are really so much a part of what I'll be talking about as we talk about building these local food systems. And it's been that way, I think, ever since I've been involved, which goes back a pretty good ways. And this is, for many of you may not know, this is sort of a return engagement for me. I was commissioner back in 1990 to 93, and that was originally appointed by Governor Michael Dukakis and then served under Bill Weld. That was just as, see how skinny I was then? That was because that was before I became Commissioner of Agriculture the first time. But one of the best perks, the greatest perks about being commissioner is that every place you go, they feed you very well. And it's usually whole milk, and it's mashed potatoes, and it's like a lot of good stuff, but it takes its toll after a while. I then served under Bill Weld. That was right as the governor, Mike Dukakis, as you probably remember, had his run for president. My sort of main goal, and I kind of got subsumed and consumed by the dairy industry at that first time around, as I really got a chance to talk with dairy farmers for the first time, realized really how hard they work. I've never met a harder working bunch of people, except maybe the greenhouse nurseries, his friend. Yeah, there are a couple of people that maybe work quite as hard, but they work so hard, have no control over the price they get for milk. They preserve a lot of land. They do a lot, but they were in serious trouble. Long story short, it was a very interesting education for someone like me who really does not come from a farming background. I'm a member of the agricultural system by virtue of the fact that I eat. I am an eater. And that means, but all of us are really part of the agricultural system, whether we're consumers or producers. And that was something that was made very clear to me. And as I got reappointed, just this past April, when Scott Soares, whom many of you probably work with, decided that he couldn't take advantage, he had to take advantage of an opportunity to join the Cranberry Marketing Committee. And he actually asked me if I would be interested in ever entertain the notion of coming back, because he didn't want to leave sort of a void as he was leaving. So he actually contacted me along with Fred Dabbing, who's a chair of the Board of Agriculture, and they kind of convinced me that it might be a good thing to do. And my kids, the slide here is just a way to get my kids in there, but they also, as I mentioned the fact that this opportunity was there again, and I was wondering if I should take advantage of it, they both looked at me and almost in unison said, "Dad, you loved that job." And they were right, so it happened. Of course, the governor had to ask too. And by the way, this governor is probably the most supportive and passionate governor I've certainly ever had any contact with when it comes to agriculture. Edible Berkshires magazine here called him the agricultural commissioner. We take him on, or he takes us on tours, and usually his aides give us mean looks because we have to drag him away from it. He'll spend 2 to 3 or 4 hours at a particular farm and really, really is into it. So he's been incredibly supportive, and this has been sort of a great juxtaposition for me to be 20 years ago commissioner, see what was going on when we were struggling to get people to think about Massachusetts growing fresher and why buy locally, and then come back 20 years later and find that the demand for locally grown food is off the charts. And the biggest challenge, I think, is going to be how do we meet that demand. I don't want you to read all this, but just sort of scan this real quickly. And I put this on here, you know, a couple of quotes. "The earth is the mother of us all, plants, animals, and men." Talks about what agriculture and how agriculture has treated nature over the years, and how short-sighted it is that we don't treat the planet again in a kinder, gentler way. Anybody idea who that quote might be attributable to? Just
Bill McKibben.
Bill McKibben, good guess. Somebody else, Thomas Jefferson. Anybody else? It was Henry A. Wallace. He was Secretary of Agriculture under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And when he was in office in 1938, he oversaw the production of something called the Yearbook of Agriculture. In 1938, it's about 800 pages. And I will tell you, if you read this, you don't have to read it all, but you thumb through this, and you would say it was written by Bill McKibben, Rachel Carson, Dr. John Todd of the New Alchemy Institute. You would say this could not have been written in 1938. But he had an idea and a perception of what agriculture can and should be, and was certainly an anomaly in terms of government. This is important to me because people in state government, and what can we do? Can we really make an impact, and can we do the right thing as government officials? And Wallace is certainly a case in point. But that was his perspective in agriculture back in 1938. And you have to excuse me here, but then this is another perspective, and this was Earl Butz, who was secretary from 1971 to 76. And his goal was really to remove farmers from the land. He took a great deal of pride in the fact that we had gone from a nation where something like 60-70% of the folks farmed the land to provide the food for the nation, to the point where we're down to 6 or 4%. And again, the large the industrialization of agriculture he saw was not only inevitable, but is something that government should consciously strive to achieve. And that was a turn. And obviously, you get fewer and fewer farms, larger farms. You substitute energy and chemicals for people and the other kind of approach to nature that Henry A. Wallace and others had predicted. And as a result now, we see that agriculture has become, at least in large part here, the commodity. Sort of interesting when you look at and see how the United States Department of Agriculture characterizes what we do here in Massachusetts. You'll see that almost everything that we grow here, they consider to be specialty crops. Now that could be it could be flattering, but it also could mean, we're kind of like a little on the periphery there, because mostly the USDA is concerned with the large commodity, the soybeans, the corn, the wheat, and it's not a bad thing, but the fact that we're sort of a little bit on the fringe. But that large-scale agriculture has had tremendous impacts on the environment and on the quality of food. When we talk about the average distance of food travels of something like 1,500 miles, and it's because we've become so centralized and substituting sort of those the chemicals and the energy for the know-how and natural processes, we've compromised both the environment and the quality of our food. And that's, again, I think that's why the local movement has become sort of really important. But it's also important that the way that we farm actually has an impact on climate. And here's again, the fact that the traditional or conventional industrialized agriculture contributes greatly to greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I got my first, again, I didn't grow up on a farm, didn't come from an agricultural background, but back in 1980s, I was hired and went to work in a little place called the New Alchemy Institute on Cape Cod. I don't know, anybody familiar here in New Alchemy? Probably good. Being in southeastern Mass, I'd hope that would be the case. And founded by John Todd, Dr. John Todd, Dr. Bill McClarney, and Nancy Jack Todd. It really was originally conceived back in the 70s. And it was an answer, almost a counterpoint to the Earth Day movement when, back, Days of Earth Day, when Rachel Carson's book really sort of inspired it. But the initial impetus on after Earth Day, where people were identifying all the things that were wrong. And that was important to do. The way that we produced our energy, the way that we produced our food, and the harmful environmental effects, pesticides and all. John, Nancy, and Bill said, it's important to identify where we see the problems are, but can we now talk about creating solutions? Is it possible? And this was really sort of the mission of the New Alchemy Institute, to really create and explore environmentally sound approaches to meeting our basic needs: food, energy, shelter. And they were naive enough to say, can we do this by, well, what's the model, they said. How do we even know how to go about doing that? And they were naive, and Margaret Mead said, dare to be naive if you're looking for real solutions, to look at the earth as a model, look at nature. And so we designed systems that were based greenhouses that mimic, we talk about the greenhouse effect, but of course if you want to extend the seasons here in the Northeast, one of the ways you have to do it is sort of create your own the greenhouse effect is what keeps the planet alive and allows us to do what we do. It's the accelerated greenhouse effect and the human-induced greenhouse effect that's a problem, not the greenhouse effect in and of itself. So the greenhouses here, New Alchemy created greenhouses that were able to produce food year-round without any backup system of heat, and they integrated aquaculture, agricultural systems, and passive solar design into these really beautiful, elegant systems, to the point where we actually, not that we thought that was the best demonstration of what, or example of what to do with these systems, but we wanted to do something somewhat dramatic. So inside this dome, as you see down here, we had fruiting fig trees. And we had banana trees in the ark, but no backup system of heat. And when they said, well, what do we do? How do we do that? And they basically, with John, again, Bill and Nancy said, let's be naive. The earth is 75%, 3/4 water. The water serves, you all know this, but a particular function in that it slowly absorbs heat energy, holds it until the air temperature gets colder, then slowly releases that heat back into the air. And so you have a moderation. That's why in the deserts, right, you get dramatic changes in temperature because you don't have the water. It's very hot during the day, but you can't capture that heat, and so it gets very cold at night. And so they said, let's observe that. Can we mimic natural processes in human design and use that as a basis for meeting our basic needs? So that was the New Alchemy. And by the way, that dome, as you can see, a bunch of us carrying that can withstand hurricane force winds. It's plastic. This was a Tefzel. DuPont made this particular material. When it was time to pick it up and move it, it took about 30 or 40 of us to plop it down. But believe me, when Hurricane Bob and all came by, withstood those hurricane force winds. And so that was also the concept of nature: doing more, using less, using your design, capture and close maximum in volume, but use the least amount of surface area to do that. You start to become more spherical. Not that we're all going to live in those things, but you understand there's a relationship between how we design things and how much material we have to use to make them work. And that's all about energy. That's all about economics. That's real economics. Real economics is energy. It's not dollars and yen and francs and other things. It's energy. That's really what we need to be, and that's what nature's economy is based upon. So we had just a kind of an example. So we realized that nature operates in ways that said in most cases there is this symbiosis. The byproducts of one system are the inputs of another. Pollution. My guru was a guy named Buckminster Fuller, who, by the way, invented the geodesic dome, and was our Leonardo da Vinci of the 20th century, without question. Buckminster Fuller was a genius, well ahead of his time. But he also said that, among other things, pollution is mostly a valuable resource in the wrong place. It's not that it's a bad thing, but we don't know what to do with it. We create the byproducts and then we dump them. There's sort of like that linear way of thinking says there's always some place where it can go. Whereas in nature, again, you see the cyclical process, and so again, we know the most obvious one is trees or plants and mammals. Oxygen, being the byproduct of plant respiration, and carbon dioxide being that of mammals. And so we have this interchange. We have this beautifully dynamic, interacting system. So here, just an example inside the Ark, the Cape Cod Ark was a greenhouse that was there. Aquaculture, raising tilapia inside the tanks, and again, water, heat source, or again, heat trap is keeping the greenhouse warm. You could have the water just standing there using and wasting space, or you could do something productive with it. And since Bill McClarty and John Todd were both marine biologists, said, why don't we raise fish for food, source of protein? Put the fish in tanks, but of course these are standing tanks, and after a while the water quality is going to get really bad, right, deteriorate. So what they did was then put a hydroponic system, that tray up there of plants supported in vermiculite, lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers. Just had the root systems dangling, little wind turbine pumped the water, what was considered, when it stood alone, wastewater, but now they circulated through the root systems of plants, so now it's nutrient-rich water, right? Because this is what the plants need to grow, so now it's a resource. The plants take up the fish waste, the nutrient-rich water, and then they filter the water. The water is circulated back to the tanks because the fish have used that. So you create a little bit of a closed system. By the way, we were back then, believe me, 70s, we were hippies, we were, in the cutoffs, we had the wild hair. You know who came to spend about a week to take a look at the system was the National Aeronautics and Space Administration and the National Science Foundation. They said, there's something here, we got it, you guys are onto something here, and we want to take a look at it. Pretty much a sort of a recent application of this are anaerobic digesters that are now being, we got the Jordan farm in Rutland where you got dairy farms and there's a problem with manure. How do you manage your manure? And in addition to that, we've got the Department of Environmental Protection saying we've got to cut how much organic waste is going into our landfills. We just don't have room for it. What are we going to do here? So here's this structure, an anaerobic digester, where Randy, Jordan, and Mary, they're taking the fish, the manure, not the fish, but I'm on the fish now, but cow manure, combining it with organic food waste and creating fertilizer and electricity, using the methane, burning off electricity, and recycling this. And you've got, once again, sort of this approach. It's not, I'm not saying these are perfect, but they are approaches that say to us, suggest to us, there are better ways to go about doing things. And in many cases, agriculture is really sort of at the center of this. I'm not going to, this one I just put up here, I found that there was a magazine that someone gave me that talked about the innovations of agriculture that have happened on Cape Cod over the years. And again, this happens to kind of focus on Falmouth because I live in Falmouth, but also because the magazine is a Falmouth magazine. But as you can see, they actually include New Alchemy, but they go through things from the dairy industry to cranberry industry through, we had folks here doing experiments with shiitake mushrooms at the old Homeport Center. If any of you are familiar with Falmouth, where we had some research centers going on that was truly phenomenal. We were hunters, gatherers, and grinders back then. Again, meat, we ground grains using windmills, wind turbines, which now, again, everybody's sort of looking at, and, there's a reincarnation and a different use of them and an evolution, but they played a very important part in our early history. And this farm, by the way, I think it was in Falmouth, they said they had to hire some 3,000 people to come in and do the harvesting. They actually hired people from other towns to come in and help with the harvesting. But this was a rich agricultural state, so a region. So when we talk about, again, into Cape Cod and southeastern Massachusetts and food systems, this is not new. We want to be able to kind of reinvent ourselves, I think. I just want Mass Department of Agricultural Resources, this is where I work. We, state agency, probably one of the smallest state agencies in government. Agricultural conservation technical assistance. We oversee agricultural markets, animal health, crop and pest services. Some things we do, we both promote agriculture and we regulate agriculture. And sometimes people think that may be a little confusing, a little bit of conflict, but we think it's important for folks who know and have a passion and knowledge of agriculture are in the best position to also regulate. And we do that conscientiously, responsibly. It's almost like if you're a parent and you have a child and you're coaching them on their soccer team, you're going to be a little extra tough on them because you don't want people to think that you're letting them get away with everything. And to a certain extent, we try to do that a little bit as we regulate. We want to make sure people know that we're serious about regulating because that's going to keep us going. But anyway, it's a great department. We are really striving, as we talk about this new thing about eating in season, people getting used to our locally grown means that what's available. We've got to do a lot more in terms of making folks not only aware of what's available, but then how to prepare it. But that also means that we use this a juxtaposition of a seafood availability chart, because we also, again, it's not a part of necessarily of agriculture, although aquaculture is, but as we start thinking about the food system, it's important for people to understand what's available, how much is available, when things are available here locally that can be consumed, so that we support each other. And when you do that, you begin to realize it's very significant, really is significant. Then they disaggregated and just looked at agriculture. We have to do that because, again, fisheries, the way, the regulations and the policies of that are so intense, and they're primarily based in D.C. when you think about, again, quotas and catches, but they still are a very important part of our food system, which is, again, really pretty significant here. What's happening in Massachusetts now with this buy local interest and increased demand, we want to extend those seasons, the growing season. When I went to my first meeting when I was a commissioner back in 1990, I went to a meeting of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture in D.C. And there were secretaries of agriculture from Texas, folks who were elected to become, the lead person in agriculture, and Carolina and California, and I had just been appointed. And so I walk in, and I was late for the first meeting, and there was so the door slams open, and everybody turns around, they see me walking down. And I was, let's just face it, I was a little conspicuous as a commissioner of agriculture as I walked down there too. It had just been appointed, so I sat down, and I sat down next to the gentleman, I think he was from South Carolina, and he kind of wanted to yank my chain a little bit, and he had a twinkle in his eye, and we were sitting there listening. All of a sudden he turned to me and said, "So son, what do y'all grow in Massachusetts?" And I said, "Wait, we grow a lot of things." I felt a little defensive here, so I told him all the things that we grow, and and he can, and then we kind of went back to listen to the speaker. Then he looked at me again, and he said, "Son, you do know that had this country been settled from the west coast to the east, Massachusetts would have been a national park." And I said, "You're probably right. If you looked at it and had time to think about it and looked at the resources and the weather, nobody in the right minds would have turned this into a state, and certainly there wouldn't be any agriculture here." But my counter to him was, that's where the Yankee ingenuity comes in, and that's why we're smarter than you. I didn't say that. But anyway, it was an important point to make. But we do have a short growing season. We have some great soils, and Derek can tell you that. But we have a short growing season. Agriculture still is a technology. This is not the way that nature grows things. So we are manipulating the environment. We are doing things that nature wouldn't do. Can we do them responsibly? And can part of that be to extend the growing season? Again, there are winter markets that are happening now. There are greenhouses. The one actually on the lower left-hand side there happens to be an urban greenhouse. That's at the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. Now we're talking about rooftop greenhouses. We're even talking about farms or buildings that will be entirely utilized, and again, this primarily in the urban environment for food. But again, our nursery and greenhouse industries thrive because of their ability to extend the seasons. We talk about increasing demand. We talk about also appealing for folks with local food and what we can grow here. One of the things that was pointed out to me early on was that this is really important, but to increase that demand, and you've got to understand that a lot of people just don't have time to cook, or they don't know how to cook the things that are produced here in Massachusetts. But part of our infrastructure, part of what's going on, you can tell that why this is so important and real. We now have publications. We have magazines. Chop Chop, which is a magazine designed to help work kids and their parents to think about food in a different way. Nutrition, but also how to cook and prepare certain meals. There are cookbooks now. This happens to be a cookbook that's designed around just the farmer's market and what you can get at a Massachusetts farmer's market. And cookbooks are on that. And at our farmer's markets in the city, you'll see demonstrations now, right? We've got folks coming in, chefs, master chefs come in. There's a challenge. They're told that they can bring in maybe one or two of their own ingredients, but everything else that they use has to come from the farmer's market. Prepare some meals. Creates a great deal of interest, great deal of excitement. It's a great thing. There are also what I call the proliferation of what I call the incredible edibles, the edible magazines, Edible Cape Cod, Edible Martha's Vineyard, Edible South Shore, Edible Boston, Edible Berkshires. And all these are a celebration of local agriculture, locally grown foods. And some of them are very high-end, but they talk about everything from not just fruits and vegetables, but wines and cheeses and poultry and meat and value-added jams, jellies, syrups. The diversity of what we can do here in Massachusetts, to a certain extent, is almost mind-boggling. So we do celebrate. We need to celebrate. We need to let people know that this is exciting. I think in the lower right-hand corner there, Fred was asking me today, did I hear about the Zucchini 500 race at the Truro Farmers Market? And this is actually probably one of the most important developments, because you all know, and you know what happens when it comes time to harvest zucchini. I think it was, I forget the woman's name that wrote a book called, she lived on her own, lived locally for a year. Somebody will remind me who it is. Thank you. That's right. And she talked about, during zucchini season, when you go to shopping malls, you lock your car door so nobody can sneak zucchini into your car, because you just know if you come back out there. But Gus Schumacher decided what you do is, at the Truro Farmers Market, they provide wheels and axles, and you come in and you design your zucchini vehicle, and they race. And the good thing about these races, down these ramps, is most of them crash into each other and they get destroyed, so you compost them. But it's a good way to dispose of the zucchini. I'm a zucchini fan. I don't want to offend anyone here, but it's fun. And you know, we have tomato tasting contests that the mayor and others kind of participate in. There are events. These greenhouses that I mentioned are popping up. They grow food, but they also host things like this one, Jazz Under Glass, or the Farm to Plate event. So there's, you know, it's a way to keep this in people's minds, to have them understand what's going on. There are also now restaurants, and again, this has become sort of a mutually supporting system where restaurants are featuring locally grown produce, and they celebrate that. They give you the menu. They can tell you what they procure locally, and they become centers of activity as well. Economic development, these are all saying we're investing in community. We believe in our community. Farmers markets, community-supported agriculture. You all know that, and if you've gone to those, they aren't just straight transactional or financial transactions. They're partnerships. People know one another. I mean, there's no question of community-supported agriculture. You're asking customers to pay in advance. You're asking them to take the farmers share the risk with us, but also share the bounty. That's a very different relationship than when you have it at a supermarket. But even farmers markets are the same thing, where people are coming together. They know the farmers know the customers. Sometimes they even change what they bring in because at the request of consumers, as long as it can make it happen. So these are very different and new relationships that are very important. In the center there is something called a Berkshire. This is out in Great Barrington, where the E.F. Schumacher Society, Susan Witt, and the late Bob Swan pioneered, or not pioneered because it's an old concept, believe it or not, but they reintroduced the notion of local currency, scrip. And they said, you know what, this is it's another way to support local agriculture it's totally legal to develop your own currency, as long as you can see here, this is Dubois, they got local or famous people from the region. They crafted these script, and they found that you could if you got enough participants, the supermarket, the hardware store, the restaurants who would accept this, and then customers, you buy with your local currency, and what it meant was you consciously go out of your way to shop locally. And people can exchange it back and forth, and it starts to build a local economy. I think they've got something like 25 banks and about $3 million participating, and somewhere at some point in time about $3 million in circulation. I don't think it's total $3 million, but right now it's a very important piece. They had a group from Denmark come over to take a look and do a little research, and I guess I thought this is a pretty interesting concept. I want to take another look. It happens during the war. It's a barter system, but it's a more formal barter system, and it's one that says, let's trust in each other. Let's trust in community. The last little thing down here is a Boston Public Market. Just got to make a pitch for that. It's on the drawing board. Hopefully, we're looking to open in 2014 a year-round public market in downtown Boston, similar to that was what Faneuil Hall originally was, right? Faneuil Hall was a marketplace for farmers to come in, and so they could sell their produce and improve their economic status. There's still food there, but the farmer piece has sort of gotten missed from Faneuil Hall. But this is not close. This is only about a block or two away that we're talking about Boston Public Market. Let me zip through this real quick. As we do this, we want to make sure that we talk about best practices, best management practices, that the quality is going to be there. We talk about, we have a program called our Massachusetts Commonwealth Quality. We gather, practitioners, farmers, who say, help us come up with standards, the best management practices that deal with energy, resource allocation, and waste, and come and demonstrate to the consumers that we're doing the best we possibly can to produce high-quality products. I know Derek and others, and I just was introduced recently to nutrient density, where, again, when Lieutenant Governor Murray went out to a national association of lieutenant governors, there's all national associations, he was out in the Midwest, and they were talking about agriculture, and they were talking about the research around agriculture that was most important, and almost all of them were talking about genetically modified organisms. That was their focus. We're going to modify the plant, and they asked us to put a little piece together for the Lieutenant Governor. I said, well, tell them that in Massachusetts we want to improve the quality of our produce, but the focus is more on soils, improving the quality of soils, which then leads to the increased quality of the produce. But it's not manipulation of the plant. It's really doing what's in the best interest of all, that is creating healthier soils. I don't know if you know that, Derek, but that is your hand there, and that was done. So there's a different approach. There's a very different approach in what we're doing here that's being done elsewhere. But I think it's a model for where agriculture is headed in terms of diversity and environmental stewardship and land preservation and all. So going to end here, not go too much longer. This all grew out of challenges. When you date back that first time I was swearing in with Governor Dukakis, back then we were in trouble. Massachusetts agriculture was on the skids. As we start back to the Second World War, into the Second World War, right into the mid-70s, we were losing hundreds of thousands of acres a year. Hundreds of farm businesses were going out of business, and Massachusetts was pretty much, they just decided, we will not grow food. Let's relinquish our responsibility for growing food to California or other places with year-round warm weather, and we'll focus on high-tech, do what we do. And it's okay, we import food. What's the big deal? That's what, the policy for food and agriculture in 1976 said, let's halt. We can't let that happen. Let's see what we could do as a state to really stop the hemorrhaging, and without looking to necessarily for federal assistance, programs like our Agricultural Preservation Restriction Program, state purchase of development rights to take the temptation of development away from farmers, Chapter 61A, which taxes farms at its agricultural rate instead of the development rate, and our direct marketing emphasis is all came out of that. So here's our APR program. It's really important. Over 800 parcels have been put under, we have purchased the development rights, which means 69,000 acres of land are forever preserved for agriculture. Again, those farmers, when they join the program, they can sell their land, they can pass it on to the kids. The only thing they can't do is have it developed. Let me just say one of the most exciting things for me as the beginning farmers, there's so much interest in folks now wanting to farm, young people. And again, the average age of farmers in Massachusetts, probably nationwide, somewhere around 55, which I think is young. But nonetheless, it's kind of getting up there. But what is it? Can we encourage and entice young folks? And I don't think it's a matter of us doing that. They want to do that. They're passionate about it. And I didn't know that Derek was going to be here, but I was able to visit his farm and see what he's doing. And then again, I was at the CMAP meeting last week, 2 weeks ago, and got introduced to other young farmers. I said, this is pretty neat. What can we do? We got to make sure access to land. There's some challenges there. Access to land and capital, like everyone else is there. But this is a very different group of folks here. It's very exciting. So I'm going to come back to that in just a second as I wrap up. These buy local chapters. There are 8 of them in Massachusetts, and really they are each kind of like their own little clusters of agricultural innovation. Because it's not just about buying local, it's really their catalyst for community building. As I mentioned before, the restaurant-supported agriculture, community-supported agriculture, businesses, innovation. There's a network of these happening. Keep your eye on them and participate to the extent that you can. There's also distribution is a challenge, so these food hubs are beginning to come into play. How do we distribute the food that's grown locally so that more and more people can have access to them? That's led to the resurgence of these mobile markets, and this one's in Worcester. There's like a little one here, the Mattapan. The Dave Jackson here from the Enterprise Farm on the right in Whately sometimes takes his truck goes from Western Mass out to Somerville. And a lot of times people see these, and I remember we used to have those trucks that came around and sold fruits and vegetables in the neighborhood. Some of them were watermelon and things like that, but right now we're sort of saying, focus on local. We may not be able to get supermarkets in every neighborhood, quote those food deserts, but we can sure as hell get trucks and buses full of fresh produce and make sure that people have access to them. I want to just make sure, as we talk about expanding this, there's now an increased interest in urban agriculture, urban farming, not just backyard gardening, community gardening, but the City of Boston, Article 89, it's a zoning ordinance that's saying to allow for enable commercial farms within the City of Boston. Somerville is doing the same thing. I suspect it's happening elsewhere. Again, and just sort of capturing that, and there's room for all of us here. I mean, we're talking about what, maybe 15% of our food needs being met right now locally, so there is certainly room for a lot more of that to happen. We want to make sure that folks through our programs like SNAP, nutrition programs, WIC, Women, Infants, and Children, that it can be affordable. I think Massachusetts gets somewhere about $500,000 so we can distribute coupons so that fixed and low income folks can go and purchase fresh produce, not Cheez-Its and not other stuff, but fresh stuff from a farmer's market. And now Gus Schumacher has actually worked with community health centers and physicians to come up with veggie prescriptions. And so they go in, there's the issue of obesity or some other nutritional problem. The physician can actually prescribe fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables, gives them a voucher that they can go to a farmer's market, CSA, and exchange. And this is all part of the education. It's all part of education. I'm going to wrap up here now. Again, our evolving food system. I mentioned, again, city, rural, it's all kind of fits together. Young people, this is a higher ground. It's a rooftop greenhouse, Boston Design Center. Two young entrepreneurs, similar to Derek and Jim Buckle and those guys, but they're not waiting for us. They're entrepreneurial. They're taking advantage of all the tools. They're taking advantage of social networking. This group actually building their rooftop greenhouse went on. What is it? What's the? Yes, thank you. And went online and basically raised $23,000 by just making an appeal mostly to strangers about this great idea. And people contributed maybe $5, maybe $15, maybe $25 with no promise of anything in return, maybe a postcard or maybe a hello or maybe I'll list you on the side of the greenhouse. But they just thought it was a great idea. And they raised, this is Kickstarter, they raised $23,000. These are tools that are out there, and again, that certainly the younger farmers are certainly finding more and more that they can take advantage of. Let me just kind of wrap up by saying there's, again, more and more hydroponics, entrepreneurial stuff, energy, again, more and more renewable energy being introduced to farms. But at the bottom line, what we want to do is to find the shortest, simplest way between the earth, the hands, and the mouth. Thank you very much. Any questions or comments before? I knew you would have one, Fred.
Well, I just wanted to add to your point on the zucchini 500. Apparently the cake was completely out of zucchini after that was over.
I think that's probably right. Yes.
Yeah, a couple of things. I know that in the earlier census, something like 1,616 new farms have come into existence in Massachusetts. And there's a new census that is either being done or has just come out. Do you have the figures for that?
No, there's still, as a matter of fact, there's an active plea for folks to still, for farmers to really participate in that census. So that's not been done yet, and it'd be relatively soon, but that's still in the process. They're really trying to encourage more and more folks to participate. The interesting thing, though, another part of what you're going to say is we have this increase in the number of farmers and farms, while the land base, though, has pretty much remained the same. Actually, we've lost a little bit of acreage, so you're having more farms. You can kind of see where it's going, but the farm acreage has pretty much remained steady, if not declined a little bit. So there's a lot more intensive farmers doing more on smaller pieces of land. So, but that's coming up shortly.
Right. And the second thing I'm concerned about is that with climate change and the impact it's having on different parts of the country, we're going to see more and more climate or environmental refugees. And they're not going to stay in areas where they can't grow food and where there's not enough water. So they're going to come to places like New England. And I'm wondering if you and the department are thinking about an influx of more population taking place in the coming years.
No, but again, that whole notion of, you're right, I mean, food security, when you look at what is going on, especially when we talk about sort of climate adaptation, that's, that is going on with the Global Warming Solutions Act here in the Commonwealth. Two things on that. One, recently at the Cranberry Experiment Station Oversight Committee of last meeting, We did talk about, I asked a number of the growers, do they get any money for climate change research? And their response was, we do. We don't call it that, but we get a lot of money. And I said, and they're talking about invasive species, for instance. So we're not immune to the climate change issue because they are identifying. They're new and different types of species, invasive species that are coming and into Massachusetts or the Northeast, and they're just trying to keep ahead on how they can protect their crops against them. They would like to do it biologically if possible, but if that's not the case, they're looking for all sorts of solutions. Or a lot of our food used to be almost all California, but now we get it from around the world. But that, you know, nature had a design, talk about nature's design. Nature's design for that area was desert. And we just, you know, by vent of us being able to redirect every natural body of water to the point now where the Colorado River doesn't even empty into the Gulf, we've been able to support this prodigious production. But in the total scheme of things, it's a very short period of time. I mean, you know, the Earth has been around for billions of years, and we think that because for 40 or 50 or even 100 years we've been able to kind of say we've outsmarted nature by being able to do this. That's really short-sighted. So we're not at that point, but we do realize that because of not only the resources, the water, but the diverse approach to agriculture. That's the other part. The best way to protect against sort of invasive species or trying to provide a buffer is to be as diverse as you possibly can. And I may not be able to protect everything, but I don't have all my proverbial eggs in one basket. Yep.
Thank you for doing what you're doing. Speaking of invasive species, what is being done regarding genetically modified food and possible cross-contamination, considering what I've seen as far as the harmful effects of genetically modified food, even on our unborn children, and what is being done to protect our food in Massachusetts against genetically modified food and the harmful effects it could have on all of our food systems.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a tough question. I would say that there's a great deal of emphasis, and one of my colleagues at the former colleagues at the New Alchemy Institute is a guy by the name of Gary Hirschberg. You may know him. Gary went on to found Stonyfield Yogurt after doing that, and right now, and he sold Stonyfield, he's trying to do whatever, still working in sustainable agriculture. His perspective is one of the first things, again, you know, in terms of protecting consumers, maybe not stopping, is labeling. You know, and you've got to be, you can't get away with not accurately and specifically labeling produce that is genetically modified. So he says consumer education, you start with that, then you start to think about what other strategies you may have. But that certainly is an emphasis that I think we would say as well. Thanks. Well, and I'll take that on, and I want to end on just one point that I know I missed because I'm looking at Vin here, and we had a conversation, and I forgot to mention something that's very important as part of our overall strategy in terms of infrastructure. You know, I will tell you, one of the most important things, and I didn't realize this, that you can do is, and part of this is the onus is on us to make you aware, but when there are budget hearings, and they kind of go around, and we had one recently in Brockton, and but sometimes we have these where our secretary, we're within the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, Secretary Rick Sullivan, and annually we have hearings, public hearings, and we ask people to come in and comment. All the commissioners are at the table, the secretary's there, and we used to think that, you know, I don't know, some people have thought, why am I doing this? I'm not sure it has any impact. I will tell you that I have legislators now coming to me on a constant basis, and what they want to know is, what are we doing, for instance, about the bees and the beekeepers? This is very important because bees are important, but I said, of all the things, well, why is it that they're all, because the they come to the meetings, they come to the hearings, and they talk and they educate the legislators, and others maybe assume that they know about it already, but they do listen. I mean, the legislators are very responsible. They want to hear from you. They want to know what's on your minds. Right? Representative Smith is here, and so being a part of that process, and not necessarily banging, not necessarily complaining, but helping to educate is one of the most important things we can do. Let me just close, because again, I'll certainly be around, but I did omit one thing, and I had the conversation earlier about our infrastructure needs, and as we think about you know, the expanded market opportunities, year-round public markets, one really important infrastructure piece in this, I've been talking mostly fruits and vegetables, our slaughter facilities. Whether you eat meat or not, there's a tremendous increase in demand for locally grown meats, poultry, and also eggs. But one of the things, we don't have the infrastructure in terms of especially, well, of the slaughterhouses, period, But those, and there are designers out there who do design humane slaughterhouses. They know what they're doing, but we are lacking those. And so that's one of the other pieces that we've been talking with folks. How do we site regionally, or is it a regional site? There's just a lot that I was going to say, I will say, there's a lot on our plate. So just want to make sure, because I did have that conversation, don't want to forget that, make sure that's out there. Support us. Fred Dabney is president of the Agriculture, the department's board, which and again plays a major role in helping us and keep on track. And thank you for what you're doing. Oh, you had one question? Yeah. Can I take one more? Is that all right? Okay.
One question in the line of, have you thought about incorporating forestry into the whole program, because of it's very important to climate, storm water control, and the fresh air that we breathe. My second question is, how long do you figure it's going to take for the government to start taxing the cash economy that you were talking about with the certificates? Thank you.
Not long.
They've actually already approached some farmers markets about that, and it's been there. Your great question, the first one. Yes, as a matter of fact, because of the Energy Environmental Affairs, that's where our department rests. There is now an effort to do large landscape preservation, which includes forests as well as farms. As a matter of fact, there's one planning, the Central Mass Regional Planning Office is looking at 11 communities, sort of the western part of the sort of Worcester County, Hardwick, Ocam, and those areas right there, and they're calling it Rural 11, and they're making the case that forestry and agriculture are the basis for the economy there, and they want them to look at then doing that, how we provide the right infrastructure to support that, but it's a combination of forestry, and by the way, the forest folks work with us on Commonwealth Quality, where we give that kind of seal of approval for best management practices. Forestry industry said they want us to, and we have created a Commonwealth Quality seal for forest products, lumber and all. So yes, absolutely, for all those reasons, and for greenhouse gases as well.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.